So now we're talking about when they used to commercially harvest sponges. Divers would dive down to the bottom, to the reef, and cut the sponges out, and then they would take them up to the top of the boat side, and they would take hammers and pound these sponges, and all the spicules get pounded and pulverized, and then they rinse them out and let them dry, and all the cellular stuff dies out, and what is left is the sponge material, and that is what you think of when you think of a sponge. You can buy bath sponges now, but most of the sponges that you buy are either cellulose or polystyrene, plastic of some sort, and loofahs. Some people call them a sponge, but they're really the actual innards of a gourd. So that's a fruit, remember, peepo. So sponges, and here's a good picture of a sponge, and you can see it just, you just can't divide that up into equal parts. So it's asymmetrical. Phylum are the cnidarians. Jellyfishes, a good example. They have radial symmetry, so we went from asymmetry to radial symmetry. And cnidaria is one of two phyla that has radial symmetry. They have no digestive system because they have no organs. They do have tissue, and since they have no digestive system, they do have this tissue lining called the gastrovascular cavity that does work as a sort of an organish layer. It does absorb nutrients from their prey. They're acoelomate. They have no segmentation. They have simple nervous tissue, sensory cells that can tell them if they're going up or down in the water column. You know, they're sort of light sensitive. They have tentacles, and these tentacles possess stinging cells called nematocysts, and these help them catch prey. So nematocysts are these little cells. They have like a coil with them, and then a harpoon that's attached to a poison gland. And when the cnidarian grabs the prey with its tentacles, all these little harpoons shoot out into the prey and send in the neurotoxin, a nerve toxin, that immobilizes the prey, and then they put it in their mouth and absorb it that way. Pretty cool. They're marine. There are a few freshwater forms of cnidarians, but there's one freshwater jellyfish. It's called Crespitacusta sourbii. All right, the freshwater jellyfish, and in late summer, early fall, a lot of the reservoirs and lakes and rivers in Kentucky, you might find these little guys. They're about the size of a $50. They do not have the ability to sting humans. Their nematocysts don't work against our skin, but they do catch little things and eat them. But we do have a freshwater jellyfish. They have what is called a hydrostatic skeleton. That means that the skeleton is filled with water. That gives them their support and what they look like. So hydrostatic skeleton. If you see a jellyfish on the beach, it just looks like a big blob of jelly, right? It doesn't have any form, but when the water comes in and takes it back out into the ocean, you see the form of the jellyfish. Now, cnidarians have two life forms. I'm going to say most cnidarians, all right? The jellyfishes especially have two different life forms. They have a polyp stage. The polyp is a tube-like body. There are certain areas that are feeding polyps that look like a little sea anemone, you know, like in Nemo. They have with a mouth and etc. And then there are some that are reproductive polyps that have little buds going on in them that will be the next life form called the medusa. The medusa is the floating, swimming, bell-shaped organism that we think of when we think of jellyfish. They have gonadic tissue, so they have reproductive tissue that produces either sperm or egg, depending on what sex. The polyp is diploid, and the medusa is haploid. And so, if we look at a crude drawing of their life cycle, you have the polyp stage, and they have reproductive polyps with medusa growing in them, and then they have tentacled feeding polyps, and they're attached to surfaces. And then the little medusa, once they mature, are released. You have males and females. The males release sperm into the water. The females release eggs into the water. I mean, you're talking about the ocean. That is a very high risk of not meeting up with a sperm, not meeting up with an egg, right? So what they do is they produce millions of eggs and millions of sperm, and that helps their chances quite a bit to get fertilization to occur. Once fertilized, the egg turns into a little ciliated larvae called a planula. It goes down to the bottom and starts a new polyp. So this is like plants, really. Remember we talked about life, alternation of generation. It's similar to that. Medusa is the haploid, bell-shaped swimming phase, and the polyp is the sessile diploid phase. And some examples: the scyphozoans are the true jellyfishes. And then anthozoans are coral and anemone. They stay as polyps. They don't form into medusae. And here's a mature polyp with the feeding and the reproductive polyps. Medusae are being formed in there. Medusae are released. You have males, females. Their fertilization occurs. They make this planula. It goes down to the bottom. It secures itself on the bottom, and then a new polyp forms. Right. So that is phylum Cnidaria. Right. We have the next phylum is a $10 word. It's Platyhelminthes. Platy means flat. Helminth means worm. So these are the flatworms. If you use a wormer on your dog or cat, that's called a helminthicide, and that means that it kills worms. All right, it's a wormer. So we went from asymmetry in Porifera to Cnidaria, which had radial symmetry, and now we move into Platyhelminthes that has bilateral symmetry. So this is the first group that has bilateral symmetry. They have an incomplete digestive tract. They do have organs. They do have organ systems. This is the only phylum that has incomplete digestive system. They're acoelomate. If you cut them in half, they just have muscle and tissue. There's no cavity in there. Some of them do have segmentation. Most don't, but one group does. They have a simple nervous system. They have bundles of nerves called ganglia, which act like simple brains, and they have nerve cords. They have an excretory system. It's very simple, and they're composed of flame cells. that help in the excretory excretion of waste. So they have true organs and organ systems. They reproduce asexually. I've tried this before. Planaria, supposedly, if you cut them in half, the head region, the anterior region, would form a posterior area, and if the posterior region will turn and form a new anterior head, so you have two individuals. I've tried that before, and have not been able to do that, but apparently they can do that. They reproduce sexually, and they are hermaphroditic. They have both male and female reproductive organs. If we are talking about plants, we call those monoecious, all right? But in animals, they're called hermaphroditic. Most are free-living, but some of them are parasitic. And so, planaria, I'm going to put this up real quick. Planaria have ganglia around their eye spots, which are sensitive to light, and then they have nerve cords that run down the body. They also have this pharynx, which is like throat, right? And at the end of that is a mouth. You'll see that the pharynx is not at the anterior end of the animal, but in the middle, and they slide along the surface, picking up spores and algae and things like that. They're free living, and if you look really closely, you can see the eye spots with the ganglia, the clear area around them. Another group of flatworms is called the flukes. Flukes are parasitic. We'll talk about those in a little bit. And then the last group are tapeworms, and tapeworms are parasitic, and they're also segmented. There are two body segments. One is a head-like structure. It's called the scolex. It has suckers and hooks on it. It allows it to grab onto the digestive tract inside. And then they have these little square or rectangular segments below. These are called proglottids. Once proglottid, the sperm has been swapped between proglottids because they're hermaphroditic. The eggs start to develop inside the proglottids, and when the proglottid is full of eggs, it breaks off into the feces or the waste as it's being released out of the body of the host. These eggs have a very heavy-duty shell on them, and so when they are released out of the body of the infected host, they can survive quite a long time in the external environment. And of course, when let's say if you're out in a field and a cow poops on the grass, that area where the poop is going to have more nutrients, so it's going to be nice and green and lush, and it'll be growing up faster than grass around it. And so it's tempting for other cattle to come over and eat. And when they eat the grass and there's eggs there, they eat the eggs and then they reinfest themselves. These tapeworms can be 10, 20 feet long. They can actually move up into the digestive tract, into the throat even. So they're really nasty parasites. The next phylum is phylum Nematoda. These are roundworms, and they have bilateral symmetry, just like the flatworms, but they are pseudocoelomates. So what makes the difference between Platyhelminthes and Nematoda is that Platyhelminthes are acoelomate and nematodes are pseudocoelomates. Another difference is the fact that the flatworms had an incomplete digestive system, and now we see in nematodes, the roundworms, have a complete digestive system. Another difference is they're dioecious. Dioecious means you have males and female individuals. All right, they don't have both reproductive organs in the same individual. You have separate male and female individuals. They don't have segmentation, but they have all the organ systems that you would think of. They have a waxy cuticle that allows them to survive in the digestive tract. We talked about that when we talked about waxes back in chapter 3. Most are free living. In fact, there are a lot that are not described or given names, and most roundworms are decomposers, free living. There is one called the vinegar eel. If you take an apple and you set it on the counter and you leave it and it starts to get moist and starting to rot, you might see these little things squiggling on the surface of the apple, and those little things are called vinegar eels. They're a decomposing roundworm. They are not parasitic, and so they are just helping break down the apple, because that's what they do. They're decomposers. But some are parasitic. Hookworm is a parasite of humans. It's not real common, not as common as the one we're going to talk about here in a second, but they are common. And then this one over here is Ascaris. It's the horse roundworm. It's parasitic on horses. Lives in the digestive tract. They're large enough, as big around as my pinky, that you can dissect them. So in zoology at Berea College, every semester at Zoolab, we would actually dissect male and female Ascaris to see their digestive and reproductive organs, etc. So we talked about flatworms and roundworms, and some of these are human parasites. One of the worst is called the blood fluke. You can get blood fluke disease from. The blood fluke is called schistosoma, and the blood fluke disease is schistosomiasis. It's very common in areas where rice is the major food crop. If you were in Laos and you have a farm and rice is what you raise, you have rice is raised in shallow ponds called paddies, right? And so you can't go out to southern states and get you fertilizer, so you have to be inventive. If you're really well off, you might have some water buffalo that you've collected their manure and use it as fertilizer. But if not, you have to be inventive, and your waste does have some nutrient positives to it. So your waste would be collected and applied to the rice paddy so that you could fertilize your rice. Now, if an infected person that has the blood fluke uses their waste, the eggs are in the waste, and when they're in the water, those eggs are hatched, and out of those come a larvae. That larvae goes and burrows through the outer skin of a snail and lives in the snail for a little while. And then when it's time for harvesting the rice, you just don't have combines or tractors. You have to get in and cut it yourself. And as you're waiting in the water, these larvae burrow out of the snail and through your skin, especially like between the toes where it's a little soft, and into your body, and then you get schistosomiasis. It is extremely, it's fatal in most circumstances because treatment is not available. Beef tapeworms are a flatworm that does live in beef muscle, the digestive tract, but sometimes if there's not enough food, they will actually burrow through the digestive tract and into the muscle tissue. The heart is a muscle, so that could be a problem in and of itself. But if the tapeworm stays in the digestive tract, it really doesn't probably cause death, but it will cause weight loss, etc., malnutrition, if you're fully infested. The thing is, you can buy capsules with beef tapeworm eggs as a dietary supplement. Please don't do that. You don't want to infest yourself with a parasite that can cause damage to your digestive tract and in possibly your heart and other muscle tissue. So just don't try that. All right, I suggest not. Pinworm is a very common human parasite, especially in the South. It's a digestive. It's a roundworm that's found in the digestive tract. Most of the time, around the anal cavity. Right. So, little Johnny goes to daycare, and little Billy picks up. Little Billy is walking around the classroom and gooching. You know what gooching is. He's got his hand in his bottom. All right. And then Billy picks up a toy, and he's playing with the toy. And little Johnny comes over and takes the toy and starts playing with it too. And then little Johnny, of course, puts his hands in his mouth after he has played with the toy. So little comes to find out that little Billy, I've lost track of names, but let's say little Billy had pinworms. Well, more than likely, little Johnny's going to have, or Jimmy, whoever I call him, will get pinworms because more than likely he hasn't ingested the eggs of the pinworm. It does not mean that your child is dirty. All right, when you have children in a setting like that, especially young children, it's very hard to keep them parasite free. All right, so they will give you something, take care of it. But this is how they find out. At night, the female will come out of the anus and lay her eggs on the anal surface around the anus. And so what your doctor may say is, before they go to bed or when they go to bed, take a piece of tape, put it over the anus of your child if it's suspected that they might have pinworms. In the morning, you just go in and pull the tape off, and if there's pinworms, they will be stuck to the tape, and they'll give you the medication to get rid of them. Again, pinworms not extremely. It's not extremely uncommon. It's fairly common, but it's not anything that you didn't fail as a parent. Your child is just in a atmosphere that is conducive to transfer of parasites. Trichinella is another roundworm that's found in pork muscle. Extremely important to cook pork good and through, because this roundworm, like I said, insists in muscle tissue. If you ingest it, an egg, they will burrow out of the digestive tract into your muscle tissue. Your heart is a muscle, and of course, could cause death. The most common occupation for trichinosis, which is trichinella worm disease, was at one time butchers, because a long time ago they would take pork and grind it up to make sausage, and then they would have their sage and other ingredients that they would add, and a lot of times instead of cooking the sausage, they would just pop a little piece of the raw sausage into their mouth to see if the spices were at the right consistency. What they were doing then was infesting themselves with trichinosis, for trichinella worms, causing trichinosis. So they don't do that anymore. And trichinella is pretty rare in most nations, where it used to be a little bit more common. So those are human parasites.